Hello all, this is Seema Govil with FABLIFE360 and we are back after the break. And as you know, today's episode is all about elections 2020 and what all we should be looking at. There are many factors that we need to be considering, not just one, two, three, four, but many. But just today we are covering a few. And my next guest is Hena Rafiq. So Hena is a Dallas native and recently served at the AAPI Muslim constituency organizer for the Texas Democratic Party. She's also currently on the leadership team for They See Blue Texas. As a Pakistani Muslim, she hadn't felt engaged, represented by the political system. So now she's working hard to bring more people into the fold of politics. And the Desi community could be the margin of victory in many parts of the country. We all know that. And so she's really excited to work with this team to turn out the Desi vote. So Hena, for today, since you are so passionate about, as a 26-year-old, your whole life is ahead of you. And many of you have been concerned, and we are seeing so many things with our environment. So tell us a little bit about climate change, what we are seeing, and how, maybe that should be my next question, and I'll roll it out right now, is how should this be a factor when we are choosing our president this year and the Senate?
Awesome. Thank you for that great introduction, Seema. Yeah, as you mentioned, I think climate change is one of those top 4 issues that we should really be thinking about. And I think there's a couple of reasons why, and I think we can draw this sort of both qualitative and quantitative idea about what is happening with the climate. But I think one data point that always really gets me, and it's like scary yet something that we really need to think about when we vote, is that in 2018, the UN put out a report and said, we have 12 years. We basically have 12 years to stop climate change. And that, that sounds very existential, and that like the world is going to blow up in 2030, which is not necessarily the case, but we are coming to this point where we've heated the earth up enough that we don't make a change, a significant change in the way that we think about the environment and the way that we handle carbon emissions and things like that by 2030, it's going to be very hard for us to reverse that footprint. And we're going to see natural disasters and climate change continuing to increase. And a lot of us are going to be in a position where we're living in unstable climate. And I think this qualitative picture, I think particularly for those of us who've been watching the news, like the California wildfires, right? Like thousands of miles of fires where trees are being burnt down. Like that is not a normal situation that we should be okay with or feel comfortable with. The amount of hurricanes we have, like we've recycled the alphabet already this year, and it's just like early October. It's just a very real situation that we should be looking at. And I think when I think about climate change, a lot of us have been told recycle, don't use plastic straws, don't use plastic water bottles, and eat less meat, eat an Impossible burger instead of a beef burger. And yes, we should all do those things. Individual change is important because we need collective action to hit this crisis. But I also think we can't blame individuals for bad policies and bad decisions made by companies. But what we can do is we can hold them accountable. And I think voting in the elections is one way to do it. And I think on one end, we have a party and administration that doesn't believe climate change is real and thinks that the science is fake. And there's another administration that sort of another side to the table that while they don't necessarily agree on the best way to maybe solve it, they very much believe that it's an existential crisis that needs to be fixed 20 years ago, and that we are very behind and that we need to catch up. So I think for me, that is definitely top of mind, because I often get friends who are extremely progressive, have thought about voting third party, and will be like, okay, but what's the difference, right? What is the difference between the 2 existing parties and the 2 people that are running on the majority platforms and the 2 names that we know, Trump and Biden? But I think climate change is one of those issues where there is a massive difference. And that is not something simple, and that is not something to take for granted, and it should be top of mind as we vote. So I think that's my sort of opening argument, I would say, at least, about what we're thinking about as we get to November.
Yeah, when you travel outside the country, recycling is at another level, and they don't, I mean, as you mentioned, individuals do it, but that's executed by the government. It's a mandate. They have to
Right.
do it.
Exactly.
And
And also, I mean, and then like broader, I think, discussions, it's interesting to see, I mean, the US stepped out of like the Paris Climate Accord, which like isn't a binding legal argument and isn't going to save the climate tomorrow, but at least is an act by a lot of other governments to accept the fact that this is a very real reality that will require a lot of people working to solve the issue. And we're not even there. Like, we're not even at that point in our administration, which I think is really, really scary. And to me, makes it feel like we have to make our voices heard at the ballot box and in other places as well, of course, to ensure that we can move past that and we can start doing the actual work that needs to be done.
I think to me, it looks like climate change is one of those books that are just sitting behind lots of other priority books that are also not taken care of, that are also not priority. But this is just a book that's behind, oh, okay, we'll get to it when we get to these issues first. And of course, we know how the major issues are being handled at the administration right now. So of course, they don't get to it. And of course, the major problem is the belief that it's not backed by science.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting what you're saying about like being behind a book. And I think that's why a lot of the conversations have started to flip with a lot of sort of young progressive leadership that is talking about how climate change and the economy are inexplicably linked. And historically, what we've seen is climate gets pushed down when the economy becomes an issue and when we need to have job growth and we need to sort of see this different change. But linking these two as a very real reality is the way I think that a lot of people are talking about sort of pushing that forward. And so like we talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's like a role model for me, but the Green New Deal talks a lot about that. And I think she's leading up the Biden, she's part of the Biden policy climate panel. And so she's helping draft some of the policies that the president would then establish. And I think it's really interesting because what they've done, as you're saying, Seema, like they've strategically combined the fact that you can both target climate change and you can lead economic recovery, which this country needs. You can create a lot of good jobs. You can have sort of get over some of the economic inequalities we have in this country. And I think that's one of the key ways of doing this, because as you're mentioning, people put it behind this book until it's going to be that like our world is literally on fire and we have no other option.
And guess what? My thing is, if you are working about economy, loans, and all those good stuff, but then when we are in the midst of hurricanes and fires and heat and cold and snowstorms, what are you going to do? What wealth and what economy and what jobs and what life are you going to have if there is no way we can step out of the house and we are not even safe?
Yeah. And if we're all not here, or if the world doesn't exist,
the
economy doesn't really matter. I agree. Absolutely. And so I think we should put a lot more emphasis on it than we do.
Thank you so much. Any last 2 lines for our viewers, listeners today?
Yeah. I mean, I think go vote in the elections, which is like less than a month away. We are very close, but also I think there's a lot of wonderful movement organizing happening around this issue. And I think voting is a big piece of this, but we're going to have to keep pushing. And I hope that everyone will turn out in the elections and make it happen.
Thank you, Hena. Thank you so much for joining this episode today and giving your valuable insights. Appreciate it. Thank you
so much.
Yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.